This is the secret sauce. I have never talked about this in a video before. YouTube, what is good? Today we are getting into the computer and we are learning about my workflow for simple photos and minimal edits. Now, if you're new to the channel, one of my favorite types of photography, I think it's kind of like my photography style. That's really weird to say out loud, but one of the things I enjoy most about photography is taking things that are simple and making them into something interesting and potentially beautiful. And one of the ways I do that is by not overcomplicating the edit. And today I'm going to show you my exact workflow from start to finish so you can do the exact same thing. Step number one on this edit is the tone curve. Now, this is the only part of today's video that isn't going to be very specific because it would take me way too long to explain. There's a 10-minute video on my Patreon where I break down exactly how I built the tone curve I use for almost all my photos, but today we're just going to do a basic run through so you can build your own. First thing we're talking about is this tone curve. Now, some tone curve basics for you to understand. Right here is your parametric tone curve. Essentially, it allows you to create motion in your tone curve based on your lights, highlights, darks, and shadows in a traditional slider format. Now we're going to jump over to the point curve right here. Now, how the point curve works, let's say you drop a point in the middle. Now, if you work in this lower quadrant, you're going to affect the shadows. So if you bring this down, your shadows are going to darken. You bring this up, your shadows are going to get lighter. Same thing up here, but for your highlights. So this is essentially a tool for creating contrast. Now, my personal advice, if you're creating a tone curve that you're going to save, that you're going to use as a starting point for a lot of photos, you don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to go over the top because it's going to affect every photo in a different way. Whereas if it's very simple, it's not going to make huge adjustments to each photo and it's going to be a nice starting point. Every single image down here is using the exact same tone curve. Let's make a quick little tone curve right here. We're going to bring our shadows down just a little bit. We're going to bring our highlights up just a little bit right there. Maybe move this center point around. I think I like that right there. Let's jump back to this parametric real quick. Bring this down a little bit. Bring our lights up just a little bit. Ooh, that looks solid right there. And let's bring these darks up just a tad bit. So that looks good. Now we're going to jump into these individual colors. Now, in all these individual color channels up here, you have your reds, your greens, and your blues. Each one of these curves works simultaneously with the other. So if you adjust one, you're most likely going to need to adjust the other. Now, this is a kind of trial and error process. What I recommend is if you create curves in each one of these, try to have them look similar. You don't want the shapes of each curve to be too different. So let's do some simple ones right here. We are going to add in a little bit to the highlights right here, add some warmth into our shadows. I think that looks pretty good. Let's jump into the greens, do the exact same thing. And we'll do the exact same thing here. Now, this is going to be a very quick example. You will probably spend a lot more time on this. It's one of these things where you're going to have to put work in on the front end to create a tone curve that you like, that's balanced, that works well together. But this is a pretty subtle adjustment. I think it looks great. So what I would do now is I'd go to develop. I'd save this as a new preset. I would create it, and now I can apply this preset to any photo as a starting point. So bang, there we go. I would say 90% of the time, that tone curve that I built for myself, I just apply it to the image as a starting point, and then I jump into my basic adjustments and I adjust those accordingly to kind of customize the image. So the basic adjustments will vary from image to image to kind of make up for the fact that presets are not one size fits all. So for basic adjustments, after I drop in the tone curve that I use on most of my photos, I go up to our basic adjustments panel and I just adjust things now based on the tone curve that I added to the image. So all images start at a very similar starting point, and then I just adjust and correct accordingly. So with this photo right here, we're going to bring our highlights down just a little bit more. We're going to add some shadows in right here. We're going to bring our whites down just a little bit, and we're going to bring our blacks down quite a bit to just add some nice contrast in there. Think that looks pretty solid. Now with digital photos, sometimes, especially with this Sigma 35mm, the photo can be slightly too sharp, especially for something like this, which is like a vintage car photo. So I like to bring the clarity down just ever so slightly. I think right around there is good. And y'all know I love a lot of color in my images, and this one is, for whatever reason, very kind of dull looking. So I'm gonna bring a bunch of vibrance into this, a lot. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more. cool. And I'm also going to bring some saturation in as well. Maybe not that much. Think right around there. But with that, I think this image looks good. Some quick basic adjustments to kind of customize this image and the edit on it based off that tone curve that we started with right there. In this example right here, I kept the colors as is. I didn't do anything to them, but our next example right here, I do need to make a minor change to the colors to get the photo back to the way I saw it in person. Now it's funny, this is a photo that I recently added to my website, evanranft.com, as a print, and that's a perfect segue into the sponsor on today's video, Squarespace. So let's talk about them and then we will get to color corrections. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring today's video. Start your free trial at squarespace.com/evanranft, and when it's time to purchase your first website or your first domain, you can use code evanranft to get 10% off. So I've actually built two websites on Squarespace. One is evanranft.com. This is my photography website. It's also a way for clients to contact me. There's an online store on there, and the other is 1826.com. This is a brand that I recently launched. It's an apparel company. We do have a launch coming out on October 29th. That's Thursday. Mark your calendar. But why did I build two websites on Squarespace? I'm sure a lot of you are asking yourself that. And the honest reason is because how easy they make it to build a website. It is simple. It's to the point. It doesn't take any design experience. Both of my websites just started as templates that Squarespace offers, and then I went in and customized them myself. I added some things, I deleted some things, and if I had questions along the way, I was able to contact the customer support that Squarespace offers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you probably love photography. You've probably considered selling prints. You've probably considered a website as a way to showcase your work. Squarespace is what I recommend, and I have a bunch of tutorials on this YouTube channel that I'll link down in the description below that can help you get started. And if you want to get started with a free trial, you can head over to squarespace.com/evanranft, and when it's time for you to sign up for your first domain or purchase your first website, you can use code evanranft to get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace, so much for being a part of this channel and sponsoring today's video. So for color adjustments right here, as you can see, we've done our tone curve, we've done all of our basic adjustments, but there's something a little bit off with this color based on how I saw it in person. Now, if we go up to our white balance and we just change it to something more warm or something more cool, it affects the entire image, which I don't want because I like the tone of this blue. This blue is perfect, it looks great. It's just, this is a little bit, I don't know, it's not as coppery as it was in real life. It's a little bit more red. So what we're going to do is do a quick color correction down here. I am going to move this red a little bit more towards the orange side to achieve that copper color. I think that color like tone and hue looks good, but it's not, it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to bring this saturation down a little bit and try to fix it. Let's do a quick before and after. We're getting there. Maybe some luminance down on this. I think that looks, yeah, that definitely looks much, much better. I'm also going to go ahead and bring the saturation down on my yellows a little bit. I think that is going to have an impact as well. That looks a little bit better, and I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Also, give it a little bit more of a muted look. I think that looks pretty good. And also, I'm going to move my purples down just a little bit because as you can see right here, I think that's purple. Let's check. Bring the hue all the way up, bring it down. Yep, you can see it right away. So I'm going to bring that purple down just quite a bit to kind of get rid of it. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe I could add a little bit more in on this. Let's see. Yeah, I think that looks pretty solid. Let's check it before and after. Just a little bit more copper in there. I might go jump and add a little bit of contrast in right here. Nothing too crazy. So bang, we got that out of the way, quick and simple. Now the next step that I do is adding a split tone to the photo if it needs it. I don't always add a split tone every time, but this image needed it. So what I'll do with the split tone is I'll jump over to my highlights. I'll drop a point way high in the split tone and I'll move it until I find a color that I think I like. That is looking pretty decent. And then obviously as I bring it down, the saturation of that split tone comes down. I think that looks pretty good right there. Let's check. Boom. There we go. Now the image has a little bit more warmth to it without changing the white balance. And we can go into our shadows as well, and we can do the exact same thing. We can go through and try to figure out what color looks good. I kind of like the way this red looks right here. We're going to bring this down, not a lot of saturation on this red, and bang, I think that looks pretty much perfect. All right, we are getting down to the final steps of this entire edit. Let's jump over to this photo right here. I'm gonna show you what I do to clean up these photos. There's two things that I do. I just like to remove distracting pieces from this photo. We do some in Photoshop, some in Lightroom, so let me show you that real quick. So there's a couple ways that you can get details out of your photo. Things that don't need to be in your image that are distracting, you can either take them away in Lightroom using the clone stamp tool right here. What I do with this, I think this is a little piece of dust or something on my lens. I'll just go highlight it, have it on heal, and then bang. Pretty much looks like we got rid of it right there. Or we can go into Photoshop and do a couple things. One thing we can do is take the lasso tool and we can go around anything in our image we want to get rid of. We can right click, we can go to fill, and we can go to content aware fill, and that is going to magically get rid of it. Or we can go over here to the clone stamp tool and we can hit Option on our keyboard to select our selection, and then that selection will go over anything that we want to get rid of. Pretty basic Photoshop editing right there, but getting rid of all these little things like this can really clean up your image and make it look a lot better. And bang, there we go. Now we are on to the final step. This is the secret sauce. I have never talked about this in a video before, but today I'm hooking y'all up with the exclusive. This is something that takes place in Photoshop. I don't do it every single time, but it's something to add a little bit more final tone to the image and just perfect it in a very simple, easy way. So let's jump into Photoshop. Let me show you this little bit of secret sauce. So to achieve our secret ingredient on these edits, what we're gonna do is right click and we are gonna go to edit in Photoshop. Now from here, there's a couple things that I like to do to create some consistency between photos. So one thing I like to do is color balance. I'll add a color balance layer in here, and this is another way to tone your image and fine tune it a little bit better than in Lightroom. Lightroom, you have some great controls, but here you can edit the midtones basically the same way as your tone curve, but it's just a little bit more simple, I think. So what I would do here is I might add a little bit of blue in to my midtones. I might slide this over a little bit more towards the magenta side, slide this over to the cool side, and then we'll go over to our shadows, and we're going to try to balance this whole thing out just a little bit better. I don't think our shadows need too much. Let's go a little bit to the cool side right here on the blues. I think that looks good, and let's check our highlights real quick. There we go. So this is something I do every now and again with a photo just to add a little bit more perfection in on the color balance. So I really like this. It matches how it looked in person a little bit better than it did in Lightroom. As you can see right here, it's a little bit too green-ish, but when I add this on, we get a little bit more blue up in here, a little bit more blue in our shadows, and there's just a little bit more contrast, and I think this looks so much better. Now, once again, this is another element of editing that I can't exactly teach. I can show you right there exactly how I do it, but it's kind of up to you and up to your artistic eye to see how you want to apply it. Now, one last thing that you can consider is adding a lookup table into your photo. This is something I don't do very often, but if you have a LUT that you use on your video, you can click on this right here, you can go find it, and then you can add that onto your image, and it might have a similar effect to what we just did here, and it allows you to create some consistency between your work. And what's cool about something like this, let's say you have two photos from this car or something like that, you can take this color balance and you can apply it to that one as well, and everything matches really nice. And if you follow me on social media and you want to know how I get borders, all I do is go to image, canvas size, %, type in a % for both sides, and click enter. Bang, now we have borders, and you can go to save as, and it's going to save it with those borders and with this adjustment back to your Lightroom catalog. And there we go. That is my workflow for simple photos and minimal edits. It's not a lot. It still is a lot. It's kind of funny. It's like a minimal edit. It looks minimal, but it still is quite a process to get to the final result. But for me, I found over the years of doing photography, I get a lot more satisfaction out of creating images that do match the way they look in person, as opposed to creating these crazy over-the-top color shift wild edits. I don't know, it's just a matter of personal preference, but for me, something like this I really feel like has a classic nice feel. It's not over the top, but it still required an edit because the raw file is not going to match the way you saw it in person or the vision you have in your head.